good evening, or perhaps good morning, depending on where you're listening from. Tonight, we're sailing into one of history's most dangerous oceans, where the line between merchant and pirate was often thinner than a ship's rope. Because somewhere beneath the crashing waves, behind stories that have become legends, hides a far stranger truth. The pirate remembered as the most notorious in world history wasn't always the bloodthirsty villain that later generations imagined. His rise depended on politics, war, greed, powerful empires, and a world that rewarded violence far more often than it punished it. And by the time governments finally decided to stop him, he had already changed maritime history forever. Before we settle into tonight's journey, I'd love to know what time it is where you are and which country you're listening from. Leave a comment below and tell me where this quiet voyage through history has reached you. If you enjoy relaxing historical stories that gently carry you through the forgotten corners of the past, consider liking the video and subscribing so you won't miss future adventures. Your comments are always a pleasure to read, and it's wonderful seeing history lovers gathering from every corner of the world. Now dim the lights a little if you can. Find a comfortable place. Perhaps pull a blanket over your shoulders. So, close your eyes if you wish. Picture the endless Atlantic stretching beneath a pale sunrise. Hear the slow creaking of timber. Feel the salt carried on the wind. And let's quietly step back into the 17th century. Europe during the second half of the 17th century was restless. Kings fought expensive wars. Empires competed across oceans. Merchant ships crossed thousands of miles carrying silver, spices, silk, porcelain, sugar, tobacco, and enslaved people. Every successful voyage promised incredible fortunes. Every failed voyage disappeared beneath the sea without witnesses. The oceans were becoming the highways of global trade. They were also becoming the world's largest crime scene. England, France, Spain, Portugal, and the Dutch Republic all wanted control of overseas commerce. Their rivalry created opportunities for thousands of sailors who possessed few possessions beyond their courage and their willingness to face violent storms. Life aboard ordinary merchant ships was exhausting. Sailors often survived on salted beef that had become nearly impossible to chew. Hard biscuits frequently contained tiny insects. Fresh water spoiled during long crossings. Disease spread rapidly. Scurvy weakened crews after months without fresh fruit. Pay was unreliable. Captains could be cruel. Discipline depended on fear. Many sailors never reached old age. Some never reached their next port. Against that harsh reality, piracy began to look surprisingly attractive. Not honorable, not safe, but profitable. A successful pirate crew might divide treasure worth several years of an ordinary sailor's wages after a single raid. For desperate young men, that possibility was difficult to ignore. The image many people imagine today, bright parrots, buried treasure, colorful flags, and carefree adventure, owes far more to novels and Hollywood than to historical records. Real piracy smelled of damp wood, rotting food, gunpowder, smoke, blood, wet clothing, long weeks of boredom interrupted by terrifying moments of violence. Even successful pirates rarely expected to live comfortably into old age. Most accepted that death, execution, or imprisonment would probably find them first. Yet the profession continued attracting recruits, because poverty often felt just as deadly. Among these uncertain lives, one young Englishman entered history. His name was Henry Avery, sometimes written as Henry Avery, sometimes John Avery, sometimes Benjamin Bridgman under false identities. His true biography remains surprisingly mysterious. Historians cannot even confirm every detail of his early years with complete certainty. That uncertainty itself tells us something important. Ordinary sailors rarely left detailed records, unless they became famous, or infamous. Avery appears to have been born around 1659, likely in Devon, England, a region deeply connected to maritime life. The southwest coast produced fishermen, naval officers, merchants, explorers, and privateers. Children growing up there became familiar with ships almost as naturally as others learned farming. The sea was not distant. It shaped daily existence. As England expanded overseas, opportunities for experienced sailors multiplied. Every probably entered maritime service while still young. He learned navigation, rigging, sail handling, weapons, the countless practical skills necessary for surviving months at sea. Unlike fictional pirates who suddenly appear with dramatic backstories, Avery's rise happened gradually. He worked aboard legitimate vessels. He gained professional experience. He earned trust. Nothing immediately suggested he would become one of history's most wanted men. But Europe remained locked in conflict. Governments increasingly hired private ships for military purposes. Privateering became common. Privateers were privately owned vessels officially authorized by governments to attack enemy commerce during wartime. The distinction between privateer and pirate depended almost entirely upon politics. Attack an enemy under government permission. You were celebrated. Attack during peace. You became a criminal. Sometimes yesterday's patriotic hero became today's outlaw without changing his behavior at all. This blurry legal boundary shaped countless maritime careers, including Avery's. By the early 1690s, he served aboard a vessel involved in Spanish service. The ship belonged to an expedition intended to challenge French commercial interests. But delays plagued the mission. Crews waited. Supplies dwindled. Pay failed to arrive. Weeks stretched into months. Sailors became increasingly frustrated. Imagine living aboard a crowded wooden ship anchored endlessly in harbor, sleeping in cramped hammocks, eating deteriorating food, receiving no wages, listening daily to promises that payment would come tomorrow. Eventually tomorrow stopped meaning anything. Mutiny rarely erupted suddenly. Usually it grew quietly. Complaint after complaint. Broken promise after broken promise. Whispered conversations below deck. Careful glances toward officers. Growing certainty that no one in authority intended to solve the problem. On the night of May 7, 1694, everything changed. Avery and many fellow sailors seized control. The captain offered little resistance once events moved beyond recovery. The mutineers avoided unnecessary bloodshed. Remarkably, those unwilling to participate were allowed to leave peacefully. That decision reveals something interesting. This was not mindless chaos. It was organized, calculated, practical. The captured vessel was renamed Fancy. Under Henry Avery's command, it soon became one of the fastest pirate ships sailing the oceans. The crew modified the vessel to improve speed. Heavy equipment that slowed movement was removed. The streamlined ship became exceptionally effective at chasing merchant vessels, or escaping naval warships. Speed often mattered more than firepower. A pirate who could choose when to fight usually survived longer. Avery also demonstrated leadership unusual among pirate captains. Many pirate crews elected their captains. Authority depended upon continued confidence. A captain who repeatedly made poor decisions might simply be voted out. Compared with rigid merchant discipline, pirate crews sometimes practiced surprisingly democratic systems regarding distribution of loot and collective decision-making. This did not make piracy fair or moral. But internally, pirate organizations often offered sailors greater influence than legitimate shipping companies. That irony has fascinated historians for centuries. The Fancy sailed toward Africa. Its destination reflected practical economics. Trade routes near the western Indian Ocean carried extraordinary wealth. European companies, Arab merchants, Indian traders, pilgrims, all crossed these waters. Where commerce gathered, pirates inevitably followed. The voyage itself tested every sailor aboard. Months passed beneath relentless sun. Storms erupted without warning. Wood constantly required repairs. Fresh food remained scarce. Disease always threatened. Yet expectations of enormous profit kept morale alive. Every successful capture reinforced confidence. Several merchant ships surrendered without major fighting. Others resisted briefly before recognizing escape was impossible. Each prize added supplies, weapons, money, experience. More importantly, every's reputation slowly spread. Merchant captains began hearing stories. A swift pirate vessel, disciplined leadership, efficient attacks, professional seamanship. The rumors traveled faster than ships themselves. Across distant ports, sailors exchanged information in taverns and marketplaces. Some stories exaggerated reality. Others underestimated it. Soon the name Henry Every carried both curiosity and fear. But none of those early victories would compare with the astonishing event that eventually transformed him from successful pirate into an international legend, whose name echoed from London to India, from royal courts to crowded waterfront taverns. That extraordinary encounter was still waiting beyond the horizon. Long before dawn painted the Indian Ocean in soft shades of grey, the crew of the Fancy had settled into the rhythm that defined nearly every pirate voyage. The sea was calm enough that the ship barely rolled. The sails swelled gently in the warm breeze, and the only steady sounds were the creaking of oak timbers, the snapping of ropes, and the distant splash of waves against the hull. It was peaceful enough that, if you closed your eyes, you might almost forget these were men who had chosen one of the most dangerous professions in the world. Life aboard the Fancy was rarely exciting every single day. Contrary to popular imagination, pirates did not spend every week chasing treasure or fighting dramatic sea battles. Most of their lives were consumed by waiting. Waiting for favorable winds. Waiting for another ship to appear. Waiting for repairs to be completed. Waiting for storms to pass. The endless waiting shaped every sailor's mind. Many spent hours mending torn clothing, sharpening cutlasses, cleaning muskets, or repairing damaged rigging. Others gambled with worn playing cards carved from scraps of wood. Some quietly carved pieces of bone into tiny ornaments to pass the time. A few simply stared across the empty horizon, wondering what waited beyond it. The ocean has a curious way of making time feel slower than it does on land. Days blended together. One sunrise resembled the next. Even experienced sailors sometimes lost track of dates without carefully maintained logbooks. For Henry Every, however, every quiet day served another purpose. He was planning. Unlike the reckless pirate captains often portrayed in novels, Every understood that surviving required patience more than bravery. A captain who attacked every vessel eventually met one that fought back too well. A captain who selected targets carefully often lived much longer. His greatest weapon was not his pistols, nor his sword. It was judgment. The Indian Ocean during the 1690s had become one of the richest commercial highways on Earth. Ships from England, the Dutch Republic, Portugal, France, Arabia, Persia, India, and East Africa crossed its waters carrying goods worth fortunes. Silks from China, pepper from India, coffee from Yemen, ivory from Africa, gold coins, silver bars, precious gems, exotic textiles. Each voyage represented months of investment and thousands of miles of risk. One successful merchant expedition might enrich investors living comfortably in London who never once smelled the salt air. The sailors doing the actual work often earned only modest wages. This imbalance existed everywhere. Pirates understood it. Instead of building wealth slowly, they intended to seize it all at once. News traveled surprisingly fast across maritime communities. A captain arriving safely in Madagascar might share information that eventually reached ports in Arabia or England months later. Sailors exchanged rumors as eagerly as merchants exchanged goods. One particular rumor soon captured Every's attention. A large convoy belonging to the Mughal Empire would soon begin its return voyage from the Arabian Peninsula. This was no ordinary merchant fleet. The Mughal Empire stood among the wealthiest and most powerful states in the entire world. Under the rule of Emperor Aurangzeb, the empire controlled vast territories across the Indian subcontinent. Its cities contained magnificent palaces, crowded markets, grand mosques, and thriving centers of trade. European kingdoms often looked wealthy by comparison with one another. The Mughal Empire looked wealthy by comparison with nearly everyone. Each year, many Muslim pilgrims traveled from India to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Their return journey frequently included merchants, nobles, wealthy travelers, valuable gifts, and enormous quantities of gold and silver. Protecting these voyages was a matter of imperial prestige. Powerful escort ships accompanied the fleet whenever possible. To attack such a convoy seemed almost unimaginable. It would be like robbing the treasury of one of the world's greatest empires. Most pirates preferred easier targets. Every did not. Instead of dismissing the rumors as impossible, he quietly began gathering allies. Pirate captains occasionally cooperated when enormous opportunities appeared. They understood that some ships possessed too many guns and too many defenders for any single vessel to overcome alone. Temporary partnerships formed. Profits would later be divided. Trust remained fragile, but greed proved persuasive. Several pirate ships gradually assembled near Madagascar, an island that had become an important refuge for pirates operating in the Indian Ocean. Madagascar offered fresh water, food, timber for repairs, and isolated anchorages beyond the immediate reach of European naval patrols. Its sheltered bays became gathering places where pirates repaired ships, traded stolen cargo, recruited new crew members, and exchanged intelligence. Although popular culture sometimes imagines permanent pirate colonies ruled by colorful captains, reality was far less organized. These were temporary communities. People arrived. People departed. Alliances formed. Arguments erupted. Then ships disappeared over the horizon once again. Henry Every earned growing respect among these men. Not because he shouted the loudest. Not because he fought the hardest. Because his decisions usually produced results. Leadership at sea depended upon competence. A mistake could sink everyone. As weeks passed, lookouts climbed the masts every morning before sunrise. Their job demanded remarkable eyesight. From high above the deck, they scanned hundreds of square miles of empty ocean. Sometimes they spotted whales. Sometimes drifting debris. Sometimes distant sails barely visible against the horizon. Every unfamiliar shape prompted careful discussion. Friend, merchant, warship, pirate. Distance often concealed the answer until ships came dangerously close. Finally, reports confirmed what Every had hoped. The Mughal convoy was approaching. Excitement spread quietly across the pirate fleet. No one celebrated yet. Experienced sailors understood that anticipation accomplished nothing. The real challenge still lay ahead. The convoy itself stretched across the sea like a floating city. Large vessels, smaller escorts, merchant ships, pilgrim ships. Every mast represented wealth beyond imagination. Yet appearances could deceive. Some carried ordinary cargo. Others transported fortunes. Selecting the correct target mattered enormously. At first, one vessel became separated from the main convoy. This ship was known as the Fateh Muhammad, owned by one of India's wealthiest merchants. Though heavily laden with valuable cargo, it lacked the overwhelming defenses of the convoy's largest ships. The pirates moved quickly. Cannons thundered across the water. Smoke drifted over the waves. Musket fire echoed between the vessels. The battle proved fierce but relatively brief. Eventually the Fateh Muhammad surrendered. The captured treasure already exceeded what many pirates might expect during several successful years. Gold coins, silver, fine textiles, luxury goods, jewelry. Enough wealth to satisfy almost any crew. Many captains would have considered the expedition complete. Henry Every thought differently. He knew the richest prize had not yet been taken. Somewhere beyond the horizon sailed the largest ship of all, the Ganj-i-Sawai. Its name has been translated in several ways, often meaning exceeding treasure, or treasure beyond compare. The title alone hinted at extraordinary riches. It was one of the Mughal Empire's most impressive vessels, massive by the standards of its day, equipped with dozens of cannons, carrying hundreds of armed men alongside pilgrims and passengers. Attacking it bordered on madness. Yet fortune has always favored those willing to attempt what others considered impossible. The pirate ships continued searching. Hours became days. Every understood the danger of failure. The longer they remained at sea, the greater the chance another naval force might discover them. Supplies diminished steadily. Fresh water required careful rationing. Every decision grew more important. Then one morning the lookout shouted, "Sail!" Far away, emerging slowly through the morning haze, appeared an enormous silhouette. At first it looked almost unreal. Its towering masts seemed to rise directly from the sea. As the distance closed, the size of the vessel became unmistakable. This was no ordinary merchantman. This was the Ganj-i-Sawai. Even seasoned pirates reportedly paused to admire it. The ship represented engineering, wealth, and imperial confidence on a grand scale. Its broad hull carried treasure accumulated across months of commerce and pilgrimage. Its passengers believed themselves protected by powerful guns and overwhelming numbers. Many probably assumed no pirate would dare challenge such a vessel. For a moment, both ships continued sailing beneath the same brilliant sky. The wind filled every sail. The ocean remained strangely calm. It was the kind of peaceful morning sailors often remembered for years. Then the silence ended. Cannons erupted. Dark smoke burst across the water. The battle that followed would become one of the most famous, and one of the most controversial pirate attacks ever recorded. It would transform Henry Every from a successful outlaw into the most hunted pirate on earth. The first cannon blast shattered the quiet morning like a clap of thunder rolling across an open valley. For a brief moment, thick gray smoke drifted lazily over the surface of the Indian Ocean, partially hiding both ships from one another. Sailors on each vessel strained to see through the haze, listening for shouted orders and the heavy splash of cannonballs striking the sea. The battle had begun. From a distance today, it is easy to imagine pirates charging fearlessly into combat, waving swords high above their heads. Reality was far less dramatic, and far more frightening. Even experienced sailors dreaded naval battles. Cannons did not simply destroy ships. They shattered wood into thousands of razor-sharp splinters. Those flying splinters often caused more injuries than the cannonballs themselves. A single broadside could send jagged pieces of oak flying through crowded decks, cutting men down in an instant. The noise alone was overwhelming. Cannons roared. Muskets cracked. Officers shouted. Rigging snapped overhead. Smoke filled the air until breathing became difficult. The smell of burnt gunpowder mixed with salt water, sweat, damp timber and fear. On board the Fancy, Henry Every remained remarkably composed. Historical accounts suggest he understood that panic spread through a crew faster than fire. A calm captain often meant calmer sailors. He moved across the deck giving clear, direct orders. The Fancy possessed one enormous advantage: speed. Its crew had stripped unnecessary weight months earlier. Now that decision began to pay off. Instead of remaining directly alongside the larger vessel, Every maneuvered constantly, seeking weaknesses while avoiding the heaviest guns aboard the Ganj-i-Sawai. The Mughal ship was enormous. It reportedly carried around 80 cannons and several hundred armed defenders, although exact numbers vary among historical sources. On paper, it should have overwhelmed any single pirate vessel. Size, however, did not guarantee victory. Large ships required more time to turn. They responded slowly. Every intended to exploit that weakness. Then something happened that historians still describe as one of the battle's decisive moments. One of the Ganj-i-Sawai's own cannons apparently exploded. Cannons during the 17th century were powerful but imperfect weapons. If poorly maintained, overloaded with powder, or weakened by previous firing, they could burst apart. When that happened, the results were catastrophic. Iron fragments became deadly projectiles. Nearby sailors were killed instantly. Others suffered terrible injuries. Confusion spread rapidly. Whether caused by poor maintenance, bad luck, or the stress of repeated firing, the explosion disrupted the Mughal crew at exactly the wrong moment. For Henry Every, it presented an unexpected opportunity. The pirates pressed closer. Grappling hooks flew through the air. Heavy iron hooks attached to thick ropes caught the larger ship's railings and rigging. Crewmen hauled with all their strength. Slowly the two ships drew together. Now the fighting became intensely personal. No longer separated by open water, men faced one another only a few feet apart. Pistols fired almost point-blank. Muskets flashed. Cutlasses struck against swords. Axes chopped through ropes and wooden barriers. Shouts echoed from deck to deck. Many sailors had never experienced combat before that morning. Merchant crews trained far less than professional soldiers. Pilgrims aboard the ship certainly had not expected to fight pirates while returning home. Fear spread quickly among the passengers. Some hid below deck. Others prayed. Some attempted to assist the defenders however they could. Historical sources describing the battle differ in certain details. European reports, Mughal records, and later retellings sometimes contradict one another. But they agree on one central fact. The struggle was fierce. It lasted long enough to exhaust both sides. Eventually, discipline aboard the Mughal vessel began to collapse. Once panic takes hold aboard a crowded wooden ship, restoring order becomes incredibly difficult. Smoke limits visibility. Officers cannot easily communicate. Rumors spread faster than commands. Someone believes the captain has fallen. Another thinks the powder magazine has exploded. Another shouts that pirates have already reached the lower deck. Whether true or false scarcely matters. People react before verifying anything. Every understood this. Rather than relying only upon superior weapons, he relied upon psychology. If defenders believed resistance had become hopeless, surrender became more likely. Bit by bit, the pirates gained control. The Ganj-i-Sawai was finally captured. Silence returned gradually. Only the sound of waves against battered hulls remained. The victory stunned nearly everyone who later heard the story. A relatively small pirate crew had defeated one of the wealthiest and most heavily armed merchant ships sailing under the protection of the Mughal Empire. It seemed almost unbelievable. Yet the consequences had only begun. When the pirates started examining the cargo, they realized they had captured something extraordinary. Chest after chest appeared. Gold, silver, jewelry, pearls, fine silk, expensive fabrics, ivory carvings, decorated weapons, luxury goods collected from across Asia and the Middle East. The exact value has remained a subject of debate among historians for centuries. Contemporary estimates suggested treasure worth roughly £325,000 in 17th century money. Converted into modern purchasing power, that represents many tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on the method used for comparison. It was among the richest pirate prizes ever recorded. For ordinary sailors who had spent years surviving on poor food and uncertain wages, the sight must have seemed almost unreal. Imagine opening a wooden chest expecting supplies, only to discover piles of silver coins reflecting sunlight. Then another, and another. Some pirates reportedly laughed. Others simply stared. A few probably wondered whether they were dreaming. The distribution of treasure followed pirate custom. Unlike many merchant ships, where wealthy owners claimed nearly everything, pirate crews generally divided loot according to agreed shares. The captain received a larger portion. Officers received somewhat more. Ordinary crewmen still received substantial amounts. No one became equally wealthy. But compared with legitimate maritime employment, the rewards were astonishing. Many pirates instantly possessed more money than they had ever imagined earning honestly. Yet wealth alone would not make this event infamous. What happened after the capture would permanently stain Henry Every's reputation. Historical records, including testimony from survivors, describe acts of violence committed against passengers after the battle. These accounts include robbery, physical abuse, and sexual assault. The exact details vary among sources, and historians continue debating particular claims, but there is broad agreement that serious crimes occurred during and after the seizure of the ship. It is one of the darkest chapters in pirate history. Modern historians emphasize these events because they remind us that piracy was not merely theft at sea. Real victims suffered enormously. Families were destroyed. Lives ended. People who had simply hoped to return safely from pilgrimage instead encountered unimaginable horror. Popular culture often softens pirate history into harmless adventure. Reality deserves greater honesty. Henry Every's name became feared not simply because he stole incredible wealth. It became feared because the attack outraged one of the most powerful rulers on earth. When news eventually reached Emperor Aurangzeb, the reaction was immediate. The emperor viewed the assault not only as robbery but as an insult to imperial authority and to subjects traveling under his protection. His anger reached far beyond personal outrage. The Mughal Empire maintained valuable commercial relationships with the English. The English East India Company depended heavily upon access to Indian ports. Factories, warehouses, merchants, and thousands of employees operated under Mughal permission. Now all of that stood in danger. Aurangzeb demanded justice. English merchants living peacefully in India suddenly found themselves under suspicion. Some were imprisoned. Trade temporarily suffered. Diplomatic tensions rose sharply. Officials in London quickly realized the seriousness of the crisis. This was no longer simply a pirate story. It had become an international political emergency. Kings could ignore small acts of piracy. They could not ignore threats to global commerce involving one of the richest empires in the world. Henry Every had unknowingly forced governments across continents to cooperate against a single man. And while officials drafted letters, issued orders, and searched desperately for answers, the fancy had already disappeared beyond the horizon, carrying its fortune, and the world's most wanted pirate, toward an uncertain future. For several days after the capture of the Ganj-i-Sawai, the Indian Ocean seemed almost unusually quiet. The sea itself gave no hint that one of the greatest robberies in maritime history had just taken place. The waves continued their endless rhythm. Flying fish still skipped across the surface. Seabirds circled overhead, searching for an easy meal. Nature remained completely indifferent to human ambition. Aboard the Fancy, however, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every chest hauled below deck reminded the crew of what they had accomplished. Gold coins clinked together whenever the ship rolled. Bundles of silk and fine cotton were stacked carefully to protect them from seawater. Jewelry, pearls, and precious stones were inventoried as best they could under difficult conditions. Even seasoned pirates had rarely seen such wealth gathered in one place. Some men could not resist opening the chests again and again, not because they needed to count the treasure, simply because they enjoyed looking at it. To men who had spent years sleeping in damp hammocks and wearing patched clothing, the piles of silver and gold seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Yet Henry Every appeared less interested in admiring the treasure than in escaping with it. The richest prize in pirate history would mean nothing if the Fancy were captured before reaching safety. He understood something that many less experienced captains overlooked. The robbery itself had been dangerous. The escape would be even more dangerous. Every expected the authorities to react swiftly. He was correct. Far away in the ports of Western India, survivors from the Mughal convoy slowly arrived with horrifying stories. Merchants described the battle. Officers spoke of the pirates' tactics. Passengers recounted the terror they had endured. Messengers rode inland carrying urgent reports. Within days, the news reached the court of Emperor Aurangzeb. Few rulers possessed greater authority than Aurangzeb during the late 17th century. His empire stretched across much of the Indian subcontinent. Millions of people lived under Mughal rule. Its cities ranked among the richest anywhere in the world. The emperor expected foreign merchants operating within his territories to respect Mughal authority. The attack on the Ganj-i-Sawai represented much more than simple theft. Challenged imperial prestige. The emperor reportedly became furious upon learning the full extent of what had happened. His response was immediate. Officials connected with the English East India Company suddenly found themselves under intense pressure. Although Henry Every acted independently as a pirate, many Mughal authorities initially suspected English involvement. After all, Every himself was English. His crew included several English sailors. To officials in India, these distinctions were not always obvious. The English East India Company suddenly faced a crisis it had never anticipated. For decades, the company had worked to build trust with Mughal rulers. Factories had been established in major trading cities. Warehouses stored valuable goods. Thousands of merchants depended upon peaceful commercial relations. One pirate captain now threatened all of it. Company officials hurried to assure Mughal authorities that Henry Every was an outlaw, not a representative of England. But words alone could not erase what had happened. Trade slowed. Some English merchants found themselves temporarily detained. Business negotiations became far more difficult. Investors back in London grew nervous. Commerce depended upon confidence. Confidence had been badly shaken. Meanwhile, aboard the Fancy, discussions among the crew grew increasingly serious. The pirates faced an enormous question. What should they do next? Keeping such a vast treasure together created obvious risks. One unlucky encounter with a Royal Navy warship could erase everything they had gained. Several crew members argued for disappearing immediately. Others suggested dividing the treasure as soon as possible. Every listened carefully. Historical evidence suggests he preferred practical solutions rather than dramatic gestures. The first priority remained avoiding pursuit. Instead of returning toward heavily patrolled European waters, the Fancy continued westward across the Indian Ocean. Its destination was uncertain. Like many pirate captains, Every constantly adjusted his plans according to weather, supplies, intelligence, and opportunity. No fixed route guaranteed safety. Sometimes unpredictability itself became a survival strategy. Life aboard the ship gradually settled into an uneasy routine. Treasure required protection. Extra guards watched below deck. Arguments occasionally broke out over suspected theft. Even among pirates, stealing from fellow crew members often carried severe punishment. Mutual trust mattered. Without it, discipline quickly collapsed. Interestingly, pirate crews frequently developed written agreements before major voyages. These documents, sometimes called pirate articles, established rules regarding shares of treasure, compensation for injuries, gambling restrictions, and acceptable conduct aboard ship. Although piracy itself violated the law, many pirate crews created surprisingly detailed internal rules. A man who cheated his fellow pirates might face harsh penalties, not because they valued morality in the modern sense, because fairness within the crew increased everyone's chances of survival. The ocean demanded cooperation. Every understood this principle well. A divided crew invited disaster. As weeks passed, rumors spread across ports throughout Africa and the Arabian Sea. Tavern conversations became filled with speculation. Some claimed the pirates had captured enough gold to purchase entire kingdoms. Others insisted they possessed magical jewels from distant India. Stories grew larger with every retelling. That is one remarkable feature of history. Facts travel. Legends travel even faster. Henry Every's reputation expanded almost beyond recognition. People who had never seen him described him confidently. Some imagined him as a towering giant. Others pictured an aging sea captain with a long gray beard. Artists who never met him later produced portraits based almost entirely on imagination. His real appearance remains uncertain. The legend became easier to recognize than the man himself. Governments, however, cared little for legends. They wanted results. Letters crossed oceans aboard fast merchant vessels. Colonial governors received instructions. Naval commanders were warned. Port officials were ordered to inspect suspicious ships carefully. Every's name appeared in official correspondence with increasing urgency. For perhaps the first time, multiple governments began coordinating efforts against a single pirate captain on a truly international scale. Rewards for information gradually increased. Capturing Henry Every promised not only justice but considerable money. The growing bounty tempted many people. Some sailors quietly wondered whether turning against former companions might prove more profitable than remaining loyal. Every understood human nature. Money could buy friendship, could also buy betrayal. Trust therefore became more valuable than treasure. The Fancy eventually approached the island of Réunion before continuing toward the Atlantic routes. Fresh water had to be collected whenever possible. Wooden barrels were refilled. Food stocks required replenishment. Fresh fruit helped reduce the constant threat of scurvy. Goats, chickens, and other livestock occasionally supplemented the crew's monotonous diet of salted meat and hard biscuit. These ordinary tasks rarely appear in adventure novels. Yet they consumed much of every long voyage. Ships survived because crews constantly repaired leaking seams, replaced worn ropes, cleaned sails, and maintained pumps. Without endless maintenance, even the richest vessel slowly became a floating ruin. During quiet evenings, sailors often gathered on deck beneath astonishingly clear skies. Far from cities, the stars appeared brighter than most people today have ever seen. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a pale river. Experienced navigators used familiar constellations to estimate direction long before modern instruments existed. One can almost imagine the pirates sitting silently beneath those stars. Some perhaps dreamed of returning home wealthy. Others imagined buying farmland. Some planned taverns. Others spoke of disappearing under false names forever. Whether those dreams were realistic hardly mattered. Dreams helped sailors endure uncertainty. Henry Every almost certainly recognized that remaining together indefinitely would become increasingly dangerous. Large pirate crews attracted attention. Treasure encouraged suspicion. Eventually, each man would need to vanish into ordinary life. But disappearing after committing the greatest pirate robbery of the century would prove far more difficult than anyone aboard the Fancy yet realized. Across Europe, Africa, India, and the American colonies, officials had already begun preparing an unprecedented hunt. The oceans were vast. Yet for Henry Every, they were about to become much smaller. The farther the Fancy sailed from the waters of the Indian Ocean, the heavier its treasure seemed to become. Not because the gold had gained any weight, but because every coin represented another reason for governments to find them. The crew understood they were no longer ordinary pirates. They had become the subjects of conversations taking place in royal palaces, merchant offices, naval headquarters, and crowded waterfront taverns thousands of miles apart. Few criminals in history had ever attracted so much international attention. Yet out on the Atlantic, life still followed the ancient rhythm of the sea. Morning began before sunrise. The night watch quietly woke the next crew. Sails were inspected. The ship's compass checked. The horizon carefully examined. Breakfast, if it could be called that, usually consisted of hard ship's biscuit and salted meat that had been preserved months before the voyage even began. Fresh water remained precious. Every barrel was measured carefully. Waste could become deadly long before land appeared. Henry Every knew that his greatest enemy was no longer another ship. It was time. The longer the voyage lasted, the more opportunities there were for news to outrun them. Merchant ships sailed faster than rumors in some places. Rumors traveled faster than ships in others. Every port had sailors eager to exchange stories. Every captain carried letters. Every government maintained agents watching commercial traffic. It was impossible to know exactly how much the world already knew. One evening, standing near the stern of the Fancy, Every reportedly gathered several of his most trusted officers. No dramatic speeches. No grand declarations. Only practical discussion. What should become of the crew? Remaining together indefinitely would invite disaster. A pirate ship carrying dozens of recognizable men could not simply sail into an ordinary harbor unnoticed. Eventually they would have to separate. History suggests that every intended exactly that. Instead of creating a permanent pirate kingdom, as later legends sometimes claimed, he appears to have believed the opposite. Disappear. Blend into ordinary society. Spend the money quietly. Never attract unnecessary attention. Sounded simple. Reality would prove much more complicated. The Fancy continued westward until it reached the Caribbean, one of the busiest maritime regions in the world. European empires competed fiercely for islands rich in sugar production. Merchant fleets arrived almost daily. Privateers, naval vessels, fishermen, traders, enslaved Africans aboard horrific slave ships, and countless smaller boats crowded these waters. For pirates, it offered opportunities. It also offered danger. Among the islands lay the Bahamas, whose governor, Nicholas Trott, would later become connected with one of the most debated episodes in Every's escape. At the time, Nassau was not yet the famous pirate haven it would become in the early 18th century. Still, colonial administration remained uneven. Governors often struggled with limited resources. Communication with England required months. Law enforcement depended heavily upon local circumstances. Some officials strictly enforced royal authority. Others proved more flexible when enough money appeared. Historians believe Every reached New Providence in the Bahamas during 1696. By then, months had passed since the attack on the Ganj-i-Sawai. The pirates hoped distance had weakened the pursuit. They underestimated how seriously governments viewed the crime. Even before they arrived, news of the robbery had spread across the Atlantic. Official letters described Henry Every as one of the most dangerous men alive. The English crown issued a proclamation offering a substantial reward for his capture. This was one of the earliest worldwide manhunts organized by the English government. Printed notices circulated through ports and colonies. Captains received descriptions. Governors were instructed to arrest the pirates if discovered. The reward itself revealed how important the case had become. Money has always motivated people. Governments understood that offering payment dramatically increased the number of eyes searching for fugitives. Every sailor, every dock worker, every tavern owner, every merchant suddenly had reason to pay closer attention. Ironically, the pirates possessed enormous wealth but could not spend it openly. A man arriving with pockets full of gold naturally invited questions. Where had it come from? Why did an ordinary sailor suddenly possess expensive jewels? How had he become wealthy so quickly? The treasure itself became dangerous evidence. According to several historical accounts, Every may have negotiated quietly with Governor Trott or individuals connected with colonial authorities. Whether through bribery, political convenience, or simple incompetence remains debated by historians. The surviving records leave room for different interpretations. What seems clear is that the pirates were not immediately arrested. Instead, many managed to disperse. Some remained briefly in the Caribbean. Others found passage aboard merchant vessels under assumed names. Several disappeared into the American colonies. Others attempted returning to Europe. The Fancy, the ship that had carried out one of history's greatest pirate raids, had now served its purpose. Maintaining such a recognizable vessel no longer made sense. Different sources disagree about precisely what became of it. Some suggest it was sold. Others indicate it was abandoned after being stripped of anything valuable. Whatever the exact details, the famous pirate ship quietly vanished from history. Ships often disappear this way. Not in dramatic storms. Not in glorious battles. Simply dismantled, reused, forgotten. The legend survives longer than the timber. As for the crew, fortune proved uneven. A handful appeared to settle successfully. Some spent their money rapidly on gambling, alcohol, and luxury. Others attempted investing in legitimate businesses. Several were eventually recognized despite their efforts at secrecy. Large rewards encouraged betrayal. Old companions sometimes became witnesses. People who had once celebrated together now feared arrest. The bonds created aboard pirate ships rarely survived the pressures of freedom. Meanwhile, in London, officials intensified their investigation. The English East India Company demanded action. Not only had enormous wealth been stolen, but commercial relations with the Mughal Empire remained under strain. Company directors understood the stakes. If Emperor Aurangzeb permanently restricted English trade, the financial consequences could be staggering. Factories might close. Merchants could lose fortunes. Future expansion in India might become impossible. The reputation of England itself stood damaged. In response, authorities launched one of the earliest examples of an international criminal investigation. Witnesses were questioned. Port records examined. Captured pirates interrogated. Letters exchanged between governors across the Atlantic world. Descriptions of suspects printed and distributed. Compared with modern policing, the investigation moved slowly. Compared with anything that had existed before, it was remarkably ambitious. Some members of Evry's crew proved less fortunate than their captain. One by one, a number were identified and arrested. Trials followed in England. Courtrooms filled with spectators eager to hear the stories behind the world's most famous pirate robbery. Newspapers eagerly reported every detail. People who had never seen the sea suddenly knew Henry Evry's name. The public fascination grew almost as quickly as the government's determination. Yet through all of this, the man they wanted most remained missing. Henry Evry had vanished. No confirmed arrest. No confirmed death. No confirmed burial. Only rumors. Some insisted he had escaped to Madagascar once again. Others claimed he lived quietly in Ireland. Some believed he had settled somewhere in the American colonies under a false identity. Still others whispered that he had returned secretly to England itself. The uncertainty transformed him into something larger than life. Most famous pirates eventually ended their stories on the gallows. Evry simply disappeared into history's shadows. And that mystery would only grow deeper as years passed, leaving generations of historians searching for the man who had somehow escaped the largest pirate hunt the world had ever seen, at least for a while. As months turned into years, Henry Evry became something far more unusual than a successful pirate. He became a mystery. Most notorious criminals leave behind clear endings. Some die in battle. Some are captured. Some stand before judges and hear their sentences. Some are buried beneath marked graves. Evry seemed to leave none of those behind. Instead, he slipped into silence. For the government searching for him, that silence was deeply frustrating. For ordinary people it was fascinating. The search did not stop simply because he had disappeared. The English government continued sending instructions throughout its growing overseas empire. Governors in the American colonies received fresh orders. Officials in Ireland watched arriving ships. Merchants in the Caribbean were questioned. Captains docking in English ports were encouraged to report suspicious passengers. The reward for information remained attractive enough that many hoped they might be the one to identify the world's most wanted pirate. This hunt was remarkably unusual for the late 17th century. Communication across oceans was painfully slow. A letter from London might require months to reach the Caribbean. Another several months might pass before a reply returned. Storms delayed ships. War interrupted routes. Letters disappeared at sea. Even under ideal conditions, governments struggled to coordinate investigations across continents. Yet they continued trying. The reason extended far beyond piracy itself. The English East India Company still worried about repairing relations with the Mughal Empire. Trade with India had become increasingly valuable. Cotton textiles, silks, spices, tea would later become enormously important. Commercial partnerships depended upon trust. Aurangzeb expected England to demonstrate that pirates operating under its flag would not escape justice forever. The company therefore had every incentive to help capture Henry Every. Back in London, newspapers eagerly printed new reports whenever rumor surfaced. Printing presses had become one of history's most powerful inventions. Stories that once spread slowly by word of mouth now reached thousands of readers. Coffee houses became centers of discussion. Merchants read shipping news. Politicians debated foreign affairs. Sailors searched for employment. Every's name appeared often enough that even people who had never seen the ocean recognized it. Some articles exaggerated his wealth. Others exaggerated his cruelty. Still others invented entirely fictional adventures after his disappearance. The public loved mysteries. Publishers understood this perfectly. One rumor claimed Every had established a hidden kingdom somewhere on Madagascar. According to the story, he ruled from a magnificent fortress surrounded by loyal pirates. Ships supposedly arrived carrying tribute. Gold overflowed from hidden vaults. Beautiful palaces overlooked tropical beaches. It made for exciting reading. There is no reliable historical evidence that any of it happened. The tale grew because people enjoyed imagining it. Another rumor suggested Every had escaped to North America disguised as an ordinary merchant. In this version, he purchased farmland, married quietly, and lived out his remaining years without anyone discovering his identity. Again, historians have found no convincing proof. Still another story claimed he reached Ireland. Others placed him in Scotland. Some even insisted he had returned openly to England under another name. The farther people lived from the actual events, the more imaginative the stories became. Legends often fill the spaces where evidence disappears. Meanwhile, several of Every's former crew members proved much easier to locate. Unlike their captain, many possessed fewer resources and fewer useful connections. Some spent their shares of treasure recklessly. Large fortunes earned quickly often vanished just as quickly. Expensive clothing, heavy drinking, gambling, lavish meals. Ordinary sailors suddenly attempting to live like wealthy gentlemen attracted unwanted attention. Questions followed. Eventually arrests followed as well. Several pirates connected to Every were captured and transported back to England. Their trials became major public events. Courtrooms filled with spectators eager to hear first-hand accounts of the greatest pirate robbery in living memory. Judges questioned witnesses carefully. Prosecutors described the attack on the Ganj-i-Sawai in vivid detail. The government wanted more than convictions. It wanted a message. Piracy would not be tolerated. The proceedings also revealed something important about the legal system of the time. Many defendants struggled to obtain adequate legal representation. Modern criminal trials include protections that did not exist in 17th-century England. Evidence standards differed. Defense opportunities were limited. Convictions could come quickly. Executions followed soon afterward. Several of Every's former companions were found guilty and sentenced to death. Public executions served multiple purposes. Authorities believed they discouraged future crime. Crowds gathered to watch. Printed pamphlets later described the events in great detail. Officials hoped ambitious young sailors would see the consequences of piracy before choosing that path themselves. Whether these executions actually reduced piracy remains uncertain. Economic hardship continued pushing desperate men toward dangerous choices. Yet the image of pirates hanging from gallows certainly left a powerful impression. Henry Every, however, remained absent from every courtroom. His empty place fascinated everyone. How had one man escaped while so many others had been captured? Some historians believe luck played a significant role. Others point to careful planning. Every had apparently understood long before many of his crew that remaining together would be fatal. By encouraging dispersal, changing identities, and avoiding unnecessary attention, he greatly improved his own chances. Even so, survival required remarkable fortune. The Atlantic world contained countless ports. Thousands of ships arrived each year. Passenger records were incomplete. Names could be altered easily. Documents were often handwritten. Verification remained difficult. A determined fugitive possessed opportunities that would scarcely exist today. As the years passed, another surprising transformation occurred. Henry Every slowly changed from criminal into popular folklore. Ballads appeared. Cheap pamphlets circulated. Adventure stories borrowed elements of his career. Writers added imaginary conversations, invented romances, and fabricated battles that never happened. One publication even suggested that Every had become an enormously wealthy king living comfortably overseas. Readers loved the idea. Reality was almost certainly much less glamorous. Many historians now suspect that if Every truly escaped immediate capture, his later life may have been deeply disappointing. One tradition claims that he eventually returned secretly to England expecting to enjoy his fortune. Instead, dishonest merchants supposedly cheated him during financial transactions. Without legal protection, a wanted pirate could hardly complain to authorities after being robbed. According to this account, much of his treasure disappeared through fraud. Unable to reveal his true identity, he supposedly died in poverty. Can this story be proven? Well, like many accounts of Every's later life, it rests upon limited evidence and later reports whose accuracy remains uncertain. Yet historians find it plausible because it fits the realities faced by fugitives. Owning great wealth means little if one cannot spend it openly. Imagine possessing chests of gold while fearing every customs officer, every harbor official, every curious neighbor. Luxury becomes difficult. Peace becomes impossible. The very treasure that promised freedom can become another prison. Whatever his ultimate fate, one fact remains certain. Henry Every vanished so completely that historians continue debating his final years more than 3 centuries later. That mystery has kept his name alive long after many other pirates were forgotten. But while Every disappeared into uncertainty, another pirate was about to emerge whose career would become even more famous in popular imagination. His black flag, dramatic appearance, and violent reputation would eventually overshadow Every in books, films, and legends, even though his career at sea lasted only a fraction as long. By the opening years of the 18th century, Henry Every had become a ghost. Not a ghost in the supernatural sense. A ghost in the historical one. Everyone seemed to know his name. Almost no one knew where he was. That strange combination made him even more famous than many pirates who were captured and publicly executed. His disappearance encouraged people to imagine endings far grander than reality probably allowed. Some pictured him relaxing on a tropical island surrounded by unimaginable wealth. Others believed he had hidden his treasure in secret caves that no one would ever find. Children growing up in English port towns heard sailors tell stories about the pirate who had somehow outwitted kings and empires. History, however, is usually less romantic. The oceans did not become safer simply because Henry Every vanished. In fact, the years after his disappearance witnessed what historians now call the Golden Age of Piracy. Between roughly 1695 and 1725, piracy expanded across the Atlantic and Caribbean on a remarkable scale. The reasons were practical rather than mysterious. Europe had spent years fighting expensive wars. When peace finally arrived after conflicts such as the War of the Spanish Succession, thousands of experienced naval sailors suddenly found themselves unemployed. Warships were retired. Privateering commissions expired. Governments reduced military spending. Men who had spent years fighting at sea returned home expecting work. Many found none. Merchant shipping paid poorly. Food prices remained high. Housing was expensive. Some former sailors had suffered injuries that made ordinary labor difficult. Others simply preferred the freedom of life at sea to strict discipline aboard merchant vessels. Piracy, dangerous though it was, offered an alternative. Henry Every's spectacular success became part of that conversation. His attack on the Ganj-i-Sawai demonstrated something that ambitious sailors could hardly ignore. One successful voyage could produce wealth beyond imagination. Most pirates never achieved anything close to Every's fortune. Many died before earning much at all. But hope has always been one of history's strongest motivators. People rarely gamble because success is likely. They gamble because success seems possible. Across the Caribbean, pirate crews gathered around campfires on remote beaches or crowded into noisy taverns where the smell of tobacco mixed with spilled rum and sea salt. Stories passed from table to table. Someone claimed to have known Henry Every personally. Another insisted he had sailed with one of Every's officers. A third swore that Every still commanded a hidden fleet somewhere beyond Madagascar. Whether any of those claims were true hardly mattered. The legend itself inspired listeners. It also inspired fear among governments. Officials recognized that stories could recruit new pirates almost as effectively as poverty. If young sailors believed piracy led to fortune, more might choose that path. That concern explains why authorities increasingly emphasized punishment. Captured pirates were not merely imprisoned. Many were executed publicly. Their bodies were sometimes displayed near important harbors inside iron cages known as gibbets. The practice appears shocking today. At the time, governments believed these grim displays discouraged future crimes. Imagine approaching London by ship. Long before reaching the city, you might see the remains of executed pirates hanging above the river. Every arriving sailor understood the warning. Choose piracy, and this could become your future. Despite such punishments, piracy continued spreading. One reason lay in the surprisingly organized society many pirate crews created aboard their ships. Modern historians have studied pirate articles, written agreements establishing rules before voyages began. Crew members often voted on important matters. Loot followed predetermined shares. Compensation existed for injuries suffered during battle. A sailor who lost an arm or leg might receive additional payment from the common treasure. Compared with merchant shipping, where captains exercised nearly absolute authority, pirate life could seem strangely fair. This does not excuse piracy. Pirates robbed, killed, and terrorized innocent people. But understanding why sailors joined them requires examining the alternatives available. Many merchant captains enforced discipline with brutal punishments. Flogging was common. Pay could be delayed for months. Food quality remained poor. Desertion sometimes carried severe legal penalties. Against that background, pirate crews offered higher earnings, greater personal influence, and a voice in collective decisions. Freedom existed alongside constant danger. It was a complicated bargain. Henry Every himself had experienced ordinary maritime life before turning pirate. His decisions reflected that world. As historians compare pirate careers, Every often stands apart. Unlike many later captains, he did not spend years attacking dozens upon dozens of ships. His reputation rests primarily upon one extraordinary success. That single event reshaped international politics. Very few pirates ever influenced diplomacy between powerful empires. Every did. The English East India Company spent years rebuilding confidence with Mughal authorities after the attack. Company representatives worked carefully to convince officials that piracy threatened English commerce as much as Indian commerce. Gradually, trade recovered. Business resumed. New agreements were negotiated. But memories lingered. Merchant captains crossing the Indian Ocean remained cautious. Convoys became more carefully organized. Security improved. Governments slowly recognized that protecting international trade required greater naval cooperation. In that sense, Henry Every's actions indirectly encouraged stronger maritime policing. Sometimes history changes not because one person intended to reshape the world, but because governments react to what that person has done. As Every's legend spread, writers found endless ways to embellish it. One of the earliest fictional pirate biographies, published in the early 18th century, borrowed heavily from real events while adding dramatic inventions. Readers rarely distinguished between fact and fiction. Adventure sold books. Historical accuracy often came second. The image of the wealthy pirate king ruling distant islands became deeply rooted in popular imagination. Centuries later, novels like Treasure Island and later films would continue blending historical pirates with fictional characters. Colorful flags, hidden maps, buried treasure, talking parrots, wooden legs. Some of these images contain tiny fragments of truth. Most owe far more to storytellers than to surviving historical evidence. Real pirates spent much more time repairing sails than digging up treasure. They worried about leaking hulls, spoiled food, disease, and unpredictable weather. Many could not even swim. That fact surprises modern audiences. Swimming was not commonly taught to European sailors. Falling overboard often meant certain death. The ocean was respected. It was never taken lightly. Henry Every understood that better than anyone. Every voyage balanced profit against survival. Every storm threatened months of preparation. Every cannon battle risked ending everything in a matter of minutes. The sea rewarded skill. It also punished overconfidence without mercy. As historians continue searching archives in England, India, the Caribbean and beyond, small pieces of every story occasionally emerge. Letter here. Court record there. A merchant's diary. A newspaper notice. Each fragment helps illuminate the remarkable career of a man who changed maritime history with one astonishing act. Yet perhaps the greatest irony remains this. The pirate who stole one of the largest fortunes ever taken at sea left behind almost nothing that can be identified with certainty. No verified portrait. No confirmed grave. No surviving house. No authenticated personal diary. Only scattered documents. And a legend that grew larger with every passing generation. While Henry Every's story faded into mystery, the age he helped inspire was only beginning. Soon, another generation of pirates would sail beneath black flags, challenge the world's greatest navies, and create names that would echo through history for centuries. Names like Blackbeard Charles Vane, Calico Jack Rackham, and Bonnie and Mary Red. Their stories would transform piracy from isolated crime into one of the most unforgettable chapters in maritime history. The world that produced Henry Every did not disappear when he vanished. If anything, it became even more dangerous. Merchant ships continued crossing the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Indian Ocean, carrying cargo that represented fortunes. Sugar plantations in the Caribbean demanded constant shipments. Tobacco from Virginia filled the holds of English merchantmen. Gold and silver continued arriving from Spanish America. European markets could never seem to satisfy their appetite for overseas wealth. Where wealth gathered, pirates followed. By the second decade of the 18th century, governments faced a growing problem. Piracy was no longer the work of a few desperate crews. It had become an international challenge. Ships disappeared with alarming regularity. Insurance costs rose. Merchants complained. Naval officers demanded more resources. Colonial governors exchanged worried letters across the Atlantic. The sea lanes that connected empires had become increasingly uncertain. One place, more than almost any other, symbolized this changing world. Bahamas. Today, visitors often imagine clear blue water, white sand beaches, and peaceful harbors. 300 years ago, parts of the islands offered something very different. They offered shelter. Shallow waters protected small vessels from larger naval ships. Hidden anchorages allowed repairs. Fresh water could be gathered. Supplies could be traded. For pirates, geography itself became an ally. Nassau gradually developed a reputation unlike any other port in the Atlantic. Government authority there was often weak. Officials lacked soldiers. Money remained scarce. Communication with London took months. This combination allowed pirate crews to arrive, repair their ships, recruit new sailors, spend stolen money, and depart again before meaningful action could be taken. It was never quite the lawless paradise later fiction imagined. But compared with heavily defended ports, Nassau offered remarkable freedom. During these years, experienced sailors arrived from every corner of the Atlantic world. Some had served in royal navies. Others had worked aboard merchant vessels. A few had once been privateers, legally attacking enemy shipping during wartime before peace left them unemployed. Many shared remarkably similar stories. Long voyages, poor food, harsh discipline, delayed wages, little hope of becoming wealthy through honest work. Piracy appeared to offer another path. Not an easy path, certainly not a safe one, but one that seemed to promise independence. Among these growing pirate communities, another famous name began attracting attention: Edward Teach. History remembers him more commonly as Blackbeard. Ironically, Blackbeard would eventually become more famous in popular culture than Henry Every, even though every single robbery had produced far greater treasure and caused much larger international consequences. The reason lies partly in personality. Every disappeared quietly. Blackbeard embraced spectacle. Historical descriptions portray Blackbeard as an imposing man with a thick black beard that reportedly reached across much of his chest. Before battle, witnesses claimed he tucked slow-burning lengths of fuse beneath his hat. As they smoldered, smoke drifted around his face. To frightened merchant crews seeing him through drifting cannon smoke, the effect must have seemed almost supernatural. Imagine standing aboard a merchant ship. The morning fog still clings to the sea. A strange vessel approaches. Its black flag rises. Then, through clouds of smoke, appears a tall figure whose face seems surrounded by fire. No wonder many captains surrendered before serious fighting even began. Blackbeard understood psychology. Fear often accomplished what cannonballs could not. A battle avoided meant fewer casualties, less damage, greater profit. Modern films frequently portray pirates as reckless men eager for constant violence. Historical evidence suggests many successful pirate captains preferred surrender. Dead sailors could not reveal where valuables were hidden. Damaged cargo sold for less money. Repairing a ship consumed time and supplies. Peaceful surrender benefited everyone, except of course the unfortunate victims being robbed. This practical approach appeared repeatedly throughout pirate history. Henry Every had used similar judgment. So did Blackbeard. Yet Blackbeard carefully cultivated a terrifying public image. Every preferred relative anonymity. These contrasting personalities shaped how history remembered them. Meanwhile, governments continued strengthening their response. The Royal Navy increased patrols. Colonial governors received broader authority. Rewards for captured pirates became more generous. Merchants organized convoys more frequently. Insurance companies developed increasingly sophisticated methods for calculating maritime risk. Piracy was changing commerce itself. One overlooked consequence involved ship design. Merchant captains increasingly favored vessels capable of sailing faster. Speed offered protection. A fast merchantman might outrun pirates altogether. Naval architects studied hull shapes carefully. Even small improvements mattered. At sea, an extra knot of speed could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Life aboard pirate ships also became more organized than many people realize. The popular image often shows endless celebration. Reality required constant labor. Every morning brought work. Decks had to be scrubbed, pumps operated, leaks repaired, cannons cleaned, gunpowder kept dry, keels patched, ropes replaced. Without discipline, a wooden sailing ship deteriorated rapidly. Saltwater never stopped attacking iron fittings. Sun weakened canvas. Wood swelled and shrank with changing weather. Maintenance consumed countless hours. Even successful pirates rarely escaped hard physical labor. Food remained another constant concern. Fresh meat spoiled quickly. Vegetables disappeared after the first weeks. Most meals relied heavily upon salted beef, dried peas, oatmeal, cheese, and ship's biscuit. The famous biscuit deserves special mention. It resembled a very hard cracker baked to remove nearly all moisture. This allowed it to survive months at sea. Unfortunately, insects frequently found it just as appealing as sailors did. Many crews simply knocked the biscuits against wooden tables before eating, hoping to remove as many insects as possible. Fresh fruit became an extraordinary luxury. Whenever ships reached islands with oranges, limes, bananas, or coconuts, sailors welcomed the opportunity to eat something that had not been preserved in salt. Many did not fully understand why citrus helped prevent scurvy. They only knew crews remained healthier after eating it. Medicine aboard ships remained extremely limited. Surgeons carried saws for amputations, simple bandages, alcohol, a handful of herbal remedies. Infections claimed countless lives. A wound that seems minor today could become fatal within days. The greatest pirate captains therefore valued experienced surgeons almost as highly as skilled navigators. Returning to Henry Every, historians increasingly recognized another important aspect of his legacy. His robbery of the Ganj-i-Sawai demonstrated that piracy could influence global diplomacy. Kings discussed him. Trading companies feared him. Emperors demanded justice because of him. Few criminals have ever forced such distant governments into direct negotiation. His attack became a lesson for future rulers. Protecting trade required more than powerful merchant ships. It required cooperation across oceans. It required stronger navies. It required faster communication. It required international effort. In many ways, Henry Every unknowingly helped convince governments that piracy was no longer merely a local crime. It had become an international problem. And while officials gradually improved their ability to hunt pirates, the men sailing beneath black flags continued adapting as well, finding new hiding places, new allies, and new opportunities in the vast waters of the Atlantic, setting the stage for some of the most dramatic confrontations in maritime history. The struggle between pirates and governments slowly became something much larger than a series of robberies. It became a contest of patience. The pirates depended upon speed, surprise, and the vastness of the oceans. Governments relied upon persistence, growing naval power, and better communication. Neither side could completely control the sea. But year after year, the balance began to change. Merchant captains learned from every attack. Naval commanders studied pirate tactics. Even insurance companies collected reports, hoping to understand where the greatest dangers existed. Every successful pirate raid became another lesson for those determined to stop the next one. For ordinary sailors, however, daily life changed very little. The Atlantic remained enormous. A voyage from England to the Caribbean could still take many weeks. Crossing the ocean depended entirely upon favorable winds. When the wind disappeared, ships drifted almost helplessly. Imagine standing aboard a wooden vessel surrounded by nothing except water in every direction. Not a single sail on the horizon. No sound except the gentle slap of waves against the hull. No engine waiting below deck. No radio. No weather forecast. Only patience. Sailors sometimes called these calm periods the doldrums. The air became heavy. The sails hung almost motionless. The blazing sun reflected off the sea until it seemed impossible to escape the heat. Fresh water had to be rationed carefully. Food spoiled more quickly. Tempers occasionally grew short. The greatest enemy was boredom. Modern life rarely allows us to experience such silence. At sea during the early 18th century, silence could last for days. That quiet gave sailors plenty of time to think. Some remembered families they had left behind. Others wondered whether they would ever see home again. A few questioned the choices that had brought them aboard pirate ships. Not every pirate joined willingly. Some sailors were persuaded. Some were threatened. Others discovered that life under a pirate captain, despite its dangers, offered better treatment than the merchant service they had known before. History rarely fits neatly into simple categories of heroes and villains. Many pirate crews included skilled craftsmen. Carpenters repaired damaged masts. Coopers maintained wooden barrels that stored precious drinking water. Blacksmiths repaired metal fittings. Sailmakers stitched enormous sections of canvas by hand. Without these specialists, no ship could survive a long voyage. Even piracy required organization. The romantic image of carefree adventurers ignores just how much hard work kept a sailing ship afloat. Henry Every understood this better than most. Although his own fate remained uncertain, the methods he used continued influencing pirate captains long after he disappeared. Attack only when success seemed likely. Avoid unnecessary battles. Keep the ship fast. Choose wealthy targets carefully. Distribute treasure according to agreed rules. Disappear before governments could organize an effective pursuit. These were practical lessons. Some future pirates followed them successfully. Others ignored them. Those who sought constant fame often attracted exactly the attention they hoped to avoid. One example stood out clearly. Blackbeard became famous partly because he wanted his enemies to recognize him. His dramatic appearance frightened merchant crews into surrendering without prolonged fighting. It was effective for a time. But fame carries its own dangers. Governors knew exactly whom they were hunting. Descriptions circulated quickly. Witnesses remembered his appearance. The same terrifying reputation that protected him also made hiding almost impossible. Henry Every had taken the opposite path. He vanished before his image became familiar. His legend survived. His face did not. By 1717 and 1718, the British government had grown increasingly determined to restore order across the Caribbean. King George I approved measures offering pardons to pirates willing to surrender peacefully before certain deadlines. This policy surprised many people. Why pardon criminals who had spent years robbing merchant ships? The answer was practical. There were simply too many pirates to defeat by force alone. A pardon divided pirate communities. Some accepted the opportunity to begin new lives. Others distrusted government promises. Still others believed they could continue escaping indefinitely. Those who refused the pardon soon found themselves facing an increasingly aggressive Royal Navy. One of the most determined officials was Woodes Rogers. A former privateer and experienced seaman, Rogers understood pirate tactics remarkably well. When he arrived in Nassau as governor in 1718, he found a settlement where pirate influence had grown strong. Rather than surrender authority, he began rebuilding government control. Fortifications were repaired. Laws were enforced. The royal pardon was offered. Those who refused soon discovered that Nassau would no longer provide the easy refuge it once had. The age of nearly unrestricted pirate havens was beginning to fade. This marked a turning point in maritime history. For nearly a generation, Piracy had flourished because governments lacked the resources to patrol every sea lane. Now priorities were changing. Trade had become too valuable to leave unprotected. Sugar plantations generated enormous profits. Transatlantic commerce expanded every year. The financial stakes encouraged governments to invest heavily in stronger navies. Even technological improvements slowly shifted the balance. Better charts reduced navigational errors. More accurate maps identified hidden reefs and dangerous shoals. Shipbuilding techniques improved. Naval officers shared intelligence more effectively than earlier generations. Pirates remained dangerous, but escaping them gradually became easier. Capturing them gradually became more likely. Meanwhile, ordinary merchant crews continued living difficult lives. The sea showed no preference for pirate or sailor. Storms struck both alike. A hurricane sweeping across the Caribbean could destroy an entire fleet within hours. Towering waves smashed masts. Powerful winds shredded sails. Ships that had survived cannon battles sometimes disappeared beneath storms without leaving a single survivor. Nature remained the greatest force on the ocean. Many experienced captains feared hurricanes more than pirates. At least pirates could sometimes be negotiated with. A hurricane offered no such possibility. Historical logbooks often describe terrifying nights when sailors cut away damaged masts simply to prevent ships from capsizing. Pumps operated without rest. Men bailed water using buckets for hours. Lightning illuminated mountains of water rising from complete darkness. Every voyage carried these risks. Whether transporting spices, silver, passengers, or mail, every ship trusted the sea to allow safe passage. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it did not. As the years passed, Henry Every's extraordinary robbery slowly became part of maritime history rather than current events. Yet officials continued mentioning his name whenever discussing piracy. He had demonstrated what one determined crew could accomplish. He had embarrassed governments. He had disrupted international trade. Most importantly, he had escaped long enough to inspire others. His legacy extended far beyond the treasure he stole. It influenced naval policy, colonial administration, international diplomacy, even literature. Novelists borrowed elements of his story. Playwrights adapted his adventures. Ballads celebrated or condemned his remarkable career. The line between historical fact and popular legend grew thinner with every generation. And still, despite all the stories, one question remained unanswered. What truly became of Henry Every after he disappeared? No official record could provide a certain answer. Only scattered clues remained. While historians searched archives for evidence, the sea quietly kept it secret, just as it had done for centuries before his ship first raised the black flag. As the decades passed, Henry Every became more difficult to find in official records but easier to find in popular imagination. That is one of history's curious habits. The fewer facts that survive, the more stories people invent. Sailors arriving in London claimed they had seen him living comfortably somewhere along the coast of Ireland. Merchants returning from the American colonies insisted he owned a plantation under another name. Others confidently declared he had settled in Madagascar, where he supposedly ruled over hundreds of loyal pirates and possessed treasure beyond counting. Every port seemed to have its own version of the story. Every tavern had someone who claimed to know someone who had once sailed with him. Yet when historians examined surviving documents carefully, nearly all those colorful tales begin to disappear. Evidence is remarkably thin. There are no confirmed letters written by Henry Every after his disappearance. No verified diary. No authenticated portrait painted during his lifetime. No gravestone that can be identified with certainty. For a man who became one of the world's most famous pirates, he left behind surprisingly little. Instead, researchers must rebuild his life from scattered government papers, court records, merchant correspondence, newspaper reports, and testimony given during the trials of captured pirates. It is rather like assembling a large puzzle while discovering that most of the pieces have been missing for more than 300 years. One document might mention his ship. Another records a witness describing the attack on the Ganj-i-Sawai. A third discusses the reward offered for his capture. Each source contributes only a tiny part of the larger picture. No single document tells the complete story. That uncertainty has encouraged generations of historians to remain cautious. Whenever discussing Henry Every's final years, responsible historians often use careful language. Possibly. Likely. It appears. There is evidence suggesting. History is not simply about telling interesting stories. It is about understanding what the surviving evidence actually supports. Sometimes admitting uncertainty is the most honest answer. One account, however, has attracted considerable attention. According to the 18th century writer Charles Johnson, Henry Every eventually returned secretly to England. First glance, this seems sensible. England was his homeland. He understood the language. He knew its ports. He may have hoped that enough time had passed for attention to fade. Yet returning also carried enormous risks. His name remained famous. Rewards for information had been widely published. Former crew members had already been arrested. Anyone recognizing him could potentially earn a substantial payment by informing the authorities. Living quietly would have required constant caution. The same account suggests another twist that sounds almost poetic. According to this version of events, Every did not lose his fortune to government confiscation. He lost much of it through dishonest businessmen. Unable to reveal his true identity or seek legal protection, he supposedly trusted merchants who cheated him during financial transactions. One deception followed another. Gradually, the vast treasure that had cost so much blood and danger simply disappeared. By the end of his life, the story claims, he possessed very little. Whether every detail is accurate remains uncertain. Yet historians often note that such an ending is entirely plausible. A wanted fugitive cannot easily purchase land. He cannot safely appear in court. He cannot openly deposit large sums with respectable bankers. Every valuable coin raises uncomfortable questions. Where did it come from? How was it earned? Who can confirm your identity? Treasure hidden in chests is useful only if it can eventually become ordinary money. That transformation would have been extraordinarily difficult for one of Europe's most wanted criminals. Imagine spending years risking your life to acquire unimaginable wealth, only to discover you cannot comfortably spend it. A fine house attracts attention. Expensive clothing invites curiosity. Large purchases require explanations. Every success threatens exposure. Freedom slowly becomes another kind of prison. If this account reflects reality, Henry Every's greatest victory ultimately became his greatest burden. Modern audiences often associate pirates with buried treasure. The truth is rather different. There is remarkably little historical evidence that famous pirates routinely buried large fortunes. Treasure was usually divided among the crew shortly after a successful voyage. Men spent their shares, invested them, lost them, or had them stolen. The famous image of treasure maps marked with a giant X owes far more to 19th century adventure fiction than to surviving pirate records. Practical reasons explain why. A pirate could not easily return months later hoping the treasure remained untouched. Storms altered coastlines. Markers disappeared. Other people might discover the hiding place. Money hidden underground earned nothing. Money spent could at least provide temporary comfort. Henry Every himself left no confirmed treasure map. Despite countless legends, no verified cache of his enormous prize has ever been discovered. That mystery continues attracting treasure hunters today. Every few years, someone announces a possible discovery. Ancient coins appear. Old anchors are found. Shipwrecks are investigated. Most eventually prove unrelated. Still, hope remains remarkably persistent. The dream of uncovering one of history's greatest pirate fortunes continues inspiring expeditions across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Historians, meanwhile, often pursue a different kind of treasure. Documents, letters, court papers, merchant logs. These fragile records frequently reveal more than any chest of gold ever could. Faded signature, an overlooked shipping manifest, a forgotten customs record. Small discoveries gradually illuminate lives that once seemed lost forever. In Henry Every's case, each new document helps distinguish fact from legend. His influence reached far beyond his own lifetime. The international response to his crimes encouraged governments to cooperate more closely across oceans. Naval patrols became increasingly organized. Colonial governors received clearer instructions. Merchants demanded stronger protection. Insurance practices evolved. Piracy had exposed weaknesses within the expanding system of global trade. Governments responded by strengthening that system. In an unexpected way, Henry Every helped shape the future of international commerce. Not intentionally, simply through the consequences of his actions. Perhaps the greatest irony of all is this. Henry Every achieved exactly what many pirates dreamed of. He escaped immediate capture after committing one of history's greatest maritime robberies. Yet the life he hoped to build afterward almost certainly remained filled with uncertainty, caution, and fear. If he truly survived for many years under another name, every unexpected knock upon the door, every unfamiliar visitor, every question about his past, may have reminded him that the sea, though dangerous, had once offered a kind of freedom that life on land no longer could. And while Henry Every faded into the shadows of history, the age of piracy itself was approaching its final dramatic chapter, one in which governments would decide that the era of the great pirate captains had lasted long enough, and they would devote unprecedented resources to bringing it to an end. By the early 1720s, the world that had allowed pirates like Henry Every to rise was beginning to disappear. Not overnight. Not with one great naval battle. Not because piracy suddenly stopped being profitable. It faded because governments slowly became better organized. Empires had learned expensive lessons. Merchant ships represented more than cargo. They carried national wealth, taxes, trade agreements, colonial supplies, military equipment. Entire economies depended upon their safe arrival. Every successful pirate attack threatened far more than one unfortunate captain. It threatened confidence in international commerce itself. England invested more heavily in the Royal Navy. France strengthened its own patrols. Spain continued protecting its treasure fleets. The Dutch improved security for commercial convoys. Even local colonial governments became more willing to cooperate than they had been a generation earlier. The sea remained enormous, but the places where pirates could safely rest grew fewer every year. Imagine sailing into a harbor after months at sea. Years earlier, local officials might have looked the other way. Perhaps a small payment changed hands. Perhaps questions simply were not asked. Now things look different. Naval officers stood on the docks. Harbor masters inspected arriving vessels more carefully. Merchants reported suspicious strangers. Governors feared losing their positions if they appeared too friendly toward pirates. The atmosphere had changed. The safest hiding places slowly vanished. This transformation did not happen because governments suddenly became morally opposed to violence. Naval warfare remained brutal. Privateering continued during wartime. Empires still fought one another across the oceans. What changed was economics. Legal trade had become too valuable to tolerate widespread piracy. The cost of stolen cargo affected investors sitting comfortably in London, Amsterdam, Paris, Lisbon, and Madrid. Insurance premiums increased. Shipping schedules became unreliable. Merchants demanded action. Politicians listened. Money has influenced government policy throughout history. The campaign against piracy was no exception. For sailors still choosing the pirate life, survival became increasingly difficult. Finding recruits was harder. Selling stolen goods became riskier. Trusted merchants who once quietly purchased illegal cargo now worried about severe punishment. Rewards offered for capturing pirates continued growing. Loyalty weakened whenever large sums of money appeared. Some crews began suspecting one another. A man willing to risk his life beside you today might betray you tomorrow if the reward became tempting enough. Trust, always fragile aboard pirate ships, grew even more uncertain. Henry Every himself had understood this danger long before many others. One reason he escaped when so many companions did not may have been his decision to separate the crew quickly after the attack on the Ganj-i-Sawai. Large groups attract attention. Small groups disappear more easily. Whether planned from the beginning or decided later, dispersing the crew reduced the chance that everyone would be captured together. Several pirates from his expedition were eventually arrested because they remained visible. They spent their money too freely. They stayed too close to familiar ports. Some trusted the wrong people. Every avoided many of those mistakes. Luck certainly helped, but careful judgment probably helped as well. Modern historians often describe Henry Every as unusually patient. He rarely fought battles simply for glory. He selected opportunities carefully. He avoided unnecessary risks whenever possible. That approach separated him from many later pirates whose reputations depended upon dramatic confrontations. Blackbeard became famous because people recognized him instantly. Every became successful because people often did not. The contrast remained striking. One pirate cultivated celebrity. The other cultivated invisibility. Both became legends for entirely different reasons. As the 18th century progressed, another change quietly reshaped maritime life. Navigation improved. The science of sailing advanced steadily. Experienced navigators relied upon detailed charts, celestial observations, compasses, and mathematical calculations to estimate their position at sea. Determining longitude remained one of navigation's greatest challenges until more accurate marine chronometers appeared later in the century. Before then, captains often estimated east-west position through dead reckoning, a method combining speed, direction, and elapsed time. Errors accumulated surprisingly quickly. Entire fleets occasionally found themselves dozens or even hundreds of miles from where they believed they were. Pirates suffered from these same uncertainties. A mistake in navigation might cause a ship to miss fresh water, strike hidden reefs, or sail directly into naval patrols. Skillful navigators therefore became enormously valuable. Many pirate captains treated experienced sailing masters with considerable respect. Without accurate navigation, courage accomplished very little. Daily life aboard merchant ships also slowly improved, though only gradually. Food remained simple. Discipline remained strict. Disease continued claiming lives. Yet governments increasingly recognized that healthier crews produced more reliable voyages. Fresh provisions became slightly more common whenever ports allowed them. Medical knowledge advanced slowly. Ship design improved. The Atlantic remained dangerous, but maritime experience accumulated with each passing generation. Historians studying Henry Every frequently emphasize another lasting consequence of his career. His attack forced the English East India Company to confront an uncomfortable reality. Private commercial companies operating across the world could no longer rely entirely upon local arrangements for security. Global trade required stronger cooperation between governments, naval forces, merchants, and colonial officials. In many respects, Every's robbery accelerated conversations already beginning within European empires. Commerce had become global. Security would need to become global as well. Meanwhile, literature continued transforming Henry Every from historical figure into legendary outlaw. Cheap pamphlets exaggerated his adventures. Playwrights borrowed his name. Storytellers added fictional romances, hidden kingdoms, miraculous escapes, and secret fortunes. Readers often accepted these tales without questioning their accuracy. Entertainment mattered more than documentation. That pattern continues even today. Many people recognize the fictional pirate more easily than the historical one. The image of pirates shouting, constantly fighting, and searching for buried treasure remains powerful. The surviving records describe something quite different. Long periods of routine, hard labor, maintenance, navigation, careful planning, sudden violence, then more waiting. The sea demanded patience before it demanded bravery. Perhaps that is one reason these stories remain so compelling. They remind us that extraordinary moments often emerge from ordinary days. Henry Every's greatest achievement, if such a dangerous crime can be described that way, occupied only a tiny portion of his life. The months of preparation mattered. The years of experience mattered. The careful decisions before and after the robbery mattered. History rarely turns upon dramatic moments alone. It turns upon countless quiet choices made long before anyone realizes their importance. And somewhere beyond the surviving records, beyond the court documents, beyond the newspaper reports, the final chapter of Henry Every's own life quietly unfolded, unseen by almost everyone around him, leaving later generations to wonder whether the world's most successful pirate ever truly escaped the consequences of the life he had chosen. Time has a remarkable way of changing people into symbols. The real Henry Every was a sailor, a mutineer, a pirate captain, fugitive. But after enough years had passed, he became something else entirely. He became an idea. To frightened merchants, he represented the dangers hidden beyond the horizon. To struggling sailors, he became proof that an ordinary seaman could, for a brief moment, overturn the established order of the world's greatest empires. To governments, he became a warning that the oceans could not be controlled by reputation alone. And to historians, he became one of history's greatest unanswered questions. As the 18th century moved forward, the great age of piracy slowly approached its conclusion. Many of the names now famous in history met remarkably similar endings. Blackbeard was killed during a fierce battle off the coast of North Carolina in 1718. Charles Vane was eventually captured and executed. Calico Jack Rackham was arrested and hanged. Bartholomew Roberts, often considered the most successful pirate in terms of ships captured, was killed during battle in 1722. Again and again, governments demonstrated that persistence would eventually overcome even the most experienced pirate captains. Their stories ended publicly. Henry Every's never did. That difference alone has helped keep his name alive. Historians often ask an intriguing question. Was Henry Every actually the most successful pirate in history? The answer depends entirely upon how success is measured. If success means capturing the greatest number of ships, then no. Several pirate captains surpassed him. If success means spending the longest career at sea, again the answer is no. Many pirates remained active for years longer. But if success means accomplishing one astonishing robbery, escaping immediate capture, and disappearing so completely that historians still debate one's final fate more than 3 centuries later, Henry Every stands almost alone. His seizure of the Ganj-i-Sawai remains one of the richest pirate captures ever reliably documented. Very few acts of piracy produced consequences that reached from the Mughal court in India all the way to the royal government in London. The robbery affected diplomacy, trade, politics, international law enforcement. That reach was extraordinary. Another legacy of Every's career lies in the evolution of maritime security. The English East India Company, already one of the world's most influential trading organizations, became increasingly aware that private commercial interests could not protect themselves entirely. Naval cooperation became essential. Convoys became more carefully organized. Merchant captains shared intelligence more readily. Colonial officials communicated more frequently. The oceans remained dangerous, but governments gradually developed better systems for responding to threats. Every had exposed weaknesses that powerful empires could no longer ignore. The sea itself, however, changed very little. Ships still depended upon favorable winds. Storms still appeared without warning. Sailors still climbed towering masts hundreds of feet above restless waves. Imagine standing on the deck of a wooden ship crossing the Atlantic in the early 18th century. The air smells faintly of tar, salt, damp rope, and weathered oak. The sails stretch high overhead, pulling gently in the steady breeze. Ahead lies nothing except an endless blue horizon. Behind you, thousands of miles of open ocean. The isolation is almost impossible for modern people to imagine. No engines, no satellite navigation, no weather radar, no instant communication. Only the wind, the stars, and the judgment of the captain. Every successful voyage depended upon experience gathered over countless previous voyages. Mistakes often proved fatal. A hidden reef, a misread current, an unexpected hurricane, a damaged rudder. Any one of these could erase an entire expedition without leaving survivors to explain what had happened. Perhaps this uncertainty partly explains why pirate stories continue capturing people's imagination. The sea has always represented possibility, fortune, freedom, and danger. Henry Every experienced all four. Yet modern historians also encourage us to remember those whose stories are less frequently told. The merchants whose livelihoods disappeared. The sailors who died defending their ships. The passengers who never expected to encounter pirates. The pilgrims aboard the Ganj-i-Sawai whose homeward journey became a nightmare. History becomes more honest when we remember every side of an event. Pirates were not simply adventurous rebels. They were criminals who often inflicted terrible suffering upon innocent people. That reality deserves to remain part of the story. One reason historians value original documents so highly is that they preserve voices often missing from later legends. Court testimony, merchant correspondence, government dispatches, ship logs, letters written by survivors. These records allow researchers to compare popular myths with contemporary evidence. Sometimes the myths contain a small grain of truth. Often they do not. Henry Every illustrates this perfectly. The historical record confirms the mutiny. It confirms the capture of the Fancy. It confirms the attack on the Ganj-i-Sawai. It confirms the enormous diplomatic crisis that followed. It confirms the worldwide search launched to capture him. After that, the trail grows faint. History gradually gives way to possibility. As researchers continue discovering forgotten documents in archives across Britain, India, and other parts of the world, small details occasionally emerge that improve our understanding. Shipping record here. A legal document there. An overlooked letter folded away inside a centuries-old collection. Each discovery reminds us that history is never completely finished. There is always another archive, another diary, another forgotten page waiting quietly on a dusty shelf. Perhaps somewhere, hidden among thousands of uncatalogued papers, lies a document that finally answers what became of Henry Every. Or perhaps no such record survived. The sea has a habit of keeping some of its greatest secrets forever. And maybe that is why his story continues to endure. Not because we know everything, but because we do not. Because even after more than 300 years, one ordinary English sailor who chose mutiny over obedience, piracy over honest employment, and uncertainty over safety still invites us to ask the same simple question. Where did he finally go? That question has crossed centuries without finding a certain answer. And as the age of sail slowly gave way to steam, and wooden ships gave way to iron, Henry Every's name remained anchored in maritime history, not merely as a pirate, but as the man whose astonishing crime briefly shook the confidence of empires and whose disappearance became one of the greatest mysteries the oceans have ever concealed. By the middle of the 18th century, Henry Every had been gone for decades. New generations of sailors crossed the same oceans without ever seeing the man himself. Yet they still heard his name. That is perhaps the greatest measure of how deeply his story had entered maritime history. Ships changed. Governments changed. Trade expanded. Entire colonies grew into thriving ports. But Every's remarkable escape continued to be discussed wherever experienced sailors gathered. Walk into a busy dockside tavern in London around the middle of the 18th century. The room is filled with a smell of wood smoke, damp wool coats, roasted meat, tobacco, and seawater carried in on heavy boots. Candles flicker against dark wooden walls. Outside, dozens of masts sway gently with the tide. Inside, conversations overlap from every corner of the room. One table discusses weather. Another argues about cargo prices. Nearby, old sailors compare storms they survived years before. Eventually, someone mentions pirates. Almost inevitably, another voice says, "Do you remember the story of Henry Every?" Some listeners know only fragments. Others confidently repeat stories that become less accurate with every telling. One insists Every escaped with enough gold to buy an entire kingdom. Another claims he buried treasure beneath an island known only to a handful of trusted companions. A third laughs and says Every died poor, cheated by merchants who recognized an easy victim. Nobody can prove any version. Nobody can completely dismiss every possibility either. That uncertainty allowed the legend to survive. Unlike Blackbeard, whose dramatic death ended speculation, Every left history without a final chapter. People naturally tried to write one themselves. The remarkable thing is how quickly history and storytelling became intertwined. By the early 18th century, publishers recognized that pirate stories sold exceptionally well. Readers living hundreds of miles from the nearest coastline eagerly purchased books describing dangerous voyages, hidden islands, fierce naval battles, and unimaginable treasure. One of the most influential works was a general history of the Pyrates, traditionally attributed to Charles Johnson. Published in 1724, the book collected biographies of famous pirates, including Henry Every. Modern historians continue debating the author's true identity, but there is little doubt about the book's influence. It helped shape the public image of piracy for centuries. Many later writers borrowed directly from it. Some details matched historical evidence. Others almost certainly reflected exaggeration or outright invention. This mixture of fact and fiction became surprisingly common. Readers wanted adventure. Publishers wanted sales. Historical precision often became secondary. Even today, films and novels frequently borrow elements that originated in these early stories rather than in surviving historical documents. The famous black pirate flag provides a good example. Many people imagine every pirate sailing beneath the same skull and crossbones design. Reality was far more complicated. Different captains used different flags. Some displayed skeletons. Others included hourglasses, bleeding hearts, swords, or other symbols intended to frighten merchant crews. Several pirates changed flags throughout their careers. Some occasionally approached under false national flags before revealing pirate colors only at the last moment. The goal was practical. Surprise. If a merchant captain realized danger too late, escape became almost impossible. Henry Every's own flag remains uncertain. Various designs have been attributed to him over the centuries, but historians cannot confidently verify which, if any, he actually used. The popular image survives. The historical certainty does not. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout pirate history. The further we move from original evidence, the more imagination enters the story. Yet despite all the myths, the realities of life at sea remained harsh. A sailor beginning a voyage still packed only a few personal possessions. Perhaps an extra shirt, blanket, simple tools, Bible if he owned one, maybe a small keepsake from home. Space aboard ships was extremely limited. Privacy hardly existed. Dozens of men slept together below deck in cramped quarters where damp air never completely disappeared. During storms, sleep became nearly impossible. The constant rolling of the ship threw men against beams and bulkheads. Water leaked through seams despite endless repairs. Everything became wet. Clothing, blankets, food. Even gunpowder required constant protection from moisture. Fresh water remained one of the greatest concerns on every long voyage. Contrary to popular belief, sailors did not simply drink rum all day. Alcohol formed part of naval life, particularly because certain drinks kept longer than fresh water, but clean drinking water remained absolutely essential. Captains carefully calculated supplies before every expedition. Running out of water often proved deadlier than encountering pirates. Disease presented another invisible enemy. Scurvy, dysentery, typhus, malaria in tropical regions, and countless infections claimed far more sailors than cannon fire. An infected cut received while repairing rigging might eventually become fatal. Medical knowledge remained limited. Surgeons performed remarkable work considering the tools available, but they understood far less about infection than modern medicine does today. Pirates faced these same dangers. They did not escape the hardships of the sea simply because they sailed outside the law. In fact, they often lacked access to the organized support available to naval vessels. No friendly dockyard waited to repair damaged ships. No government warehouse supplied replacement sails. Everything depended upon what they could steal, trade, or repair themselves. Henry Every certainly understood these realities. His success depended as much upon careful seamanship as bold decision-making. The Fancy remained fast because its crew constantly maintained it. Rigging required attention almost daily. Sails needed patching. Hull leaks demanded repair. Pumps removed water that slowly seeped into every wooden ship. Without disciplined maintenance, the famous pirate vessel would never have reached the Ganj-i-Sawai in the first place. Modern historians increasingly emphasize this practical side of piracy. The dramatic battles attract attention. The ordinary work made those battles possible. Perhaps there is an important lesson hidden there. History is rarely built entirely upon extraordinary moments. More often, it rests upon thousands of ordinary tasks performed well enough to allow extraordinary moments to occur. Every's greatest robbery lasted only a short time. The years of preparation behind it lasted much longer. As the 18th century continued, piracy declined steadily. The great pirate captains disappeared one by one. Some died in battle. Some faced execution. Others accepted royal pardons and attempted quieter lives. The era that had briefly terrified the Atlantic world slowly became history. But one story refused to disappear with it. The story of the English sailor who captured one of the richest ships on earth, outwitted governments across continents, then vanished so completely that generations afterward, historians still searched for the final page that history itself never seemed willing to provide. By the time the 18th century drew toward its later years, the great era of ocean piracy had largely passed into memory. The black flags that had once terrified merchant captains appeared less frequently. Royal navies had grown stronger. Merchant convoys had become more disciplined. Governments communicated more effectively than they had during Henry Every's lifetime. What had once been a scattered effort to suppress piracy had evolved into a coordinated international campaign. The oceans were still dangerous. Storms still claimed ships. Reefs still waited beneath shallow water. Disease still spread through crowded decks. But pirates no longer dominated maritime headlines as they once had. Their age was ending. History, however, rarely allows remarkable stories to disappear completely. Instead, it reshapes them. Henry Every's life slowly passed from recent memory into historical legend. His name appeared in books discussing famous criminals. Maritime historians analyzed surviving court records. Collectors searched for old newspapers mentioning his exploits. Archivists carefully preserved letters exchanged between the English government and the East India Company. Each generation examined the same evidence while asking slightly different questions. Earlier writers often admired daring adventures. Modern historians tend to ask broader questions. Why did piracy become so widespread? What economic pressures pushed ordinary sailors toward crime? How did international trade create opportunities for men like Every? How did governments eventually succeed in reducing piracy? These questions reveal that Henry Every's story belongs to something much larger than one remarkable robbery. It belongs to the history of globalization itself. During the 17th century, oceans no longer separated continents as completely as they once had. Instead, they connected them. Ships carried spices from Asia, silver from the Americas, textiles from India, sugar from the Caribbean, tea from China, coffee from Arabia. Ideas traveled alongside cargo. So did diseases. So did political conflicts. And occasionally, so did pirates. Henry Every operated during this period of extraordinary change. He understood something many rulers were only beginning to recognize. Control of the sea meant control of wealth. The attack upon the Ganj-i-Sawai proved exactly how vulnerable even the richest trading networks could be. One successful pirate expedition disrupted relationships between England and the Mughal Empire. Merchants worried. Investors hesitated. Governments exchanged urgent diplomatic letters. The consequences spread thousands of miles beyond the place where the cannons had actually fired. Few individual crimes have produced such widespread political effects. Today, historians continue studying those diplomatic records because they reveal how interconnected the early modern world had already become. Events occurring in the Indian Ocean influenced decisions made in London. Orders written in London affected governors in the Caribbean. Merchants in Amsterdam watched carefully because changes in English trade could influence Dutch commerce as well. The oceans connected everyone more closely than many people living at the time fully realized. Henry Every became one unexpected reminder of that reality. Interestingly, maritime archaeology has also contributed to our understanding of this period. Although no confirmed remains of the Fancy have ever been identified, archaeologists have recovered numerous shipwrecks from the 17th and 18th centuries. These discoveries help historians understand everyday life aboard vessels similar to Every's. Cannons recovered from the seabed show how naval weapons were constructed. Fragments of pottery reveal what sailors ate from. Buttons, buckles, clay tobacco pipes, navigation instruments, and personal belongings provide glimpses into lives otherwise lost. History is not reconstructed only through written documents. Sometimes a rusted nail tells part of the story. Sometimes a broken compass. Sometimes the remains of a wooden hull resting quietly beneath layers of sand. Each discovery reminds us that the people we study were ordinary human beings living through extraordinary circumstances. Henry Every was not born intending to become history's most notorious pirate. He was born into a maritime world where opportunities and hardships often existed side by side. The line separating lawful sailor, privateer, mutineer, and pirate could become remarkably thin depending upon politics, war, and personal fortune. Understanding that complexity helps explain his choices, does not excuse them. The suffering experienced by the passengers and crew of the Ganj-i-Sawai remains one of the darkest parts of his story. Modern historical research rightly emphasizes their experiences alongside the pirates' achievements. The victims deserve remembrance as much as the criminal whose name became famous. Perhaps that balance is one of the most important lessons history offers. It reminds us that famous individuals are rarely the only people whose stories matter. Behind every celebrated event stand countless ordinary lives affected by it. The merchants who lost fortunes. The sailors who defended their ships. The families waiting for loved ones who never returned. The officials struggling to preserve peace between distant governments. History becomes richer when we remember all of them together. As historians continue comparing English, Indian, Dutch, French, Portuguese, and colonial records, Henry Every's biography grows slightly clearer with each passing decade. Yet the final mystery remains unsolved. Did he truly die in poverty? Did he quietly settle somewhere under another name? Did illness claim him far from home? Did he ever look back upon the extraordinary choices that had transformed an ordinary English sailor into the subject of worldwide manhunts and enduring legend? No surviving document answers those questions with certainty, and perhaps none ever will. Some mysteries survive not because people failed to search for answers, but because time quietly carried those answers away. The sea has always been like that. It preserves some stories in remarkable detail while allowing others to disappear beneath the waves forever. Even after more than 3 centuries, Henry Every's legacy remains secure, not because historians know everything about him, but because the known facts alone are extraordinary enough. An ordinary sailor joined a mutiny. He transformed a captured ship into one of the fastest pirate vessels of his age. He seized one of the richest prizes ever taken at sea. He provoked an international diplomatic crisis involving one of the world's greatest empires. He became the target of one of the earliest global manhunts. Then, he vanished so completely that history itself could preserve only the outline of the man, leaving later generations to search endlessly for the details that slipped away with him across the endless horizon. The waves that carried Henry Every across the oceans more than 3 centuries ago have long since disappeared. Every tide that lifted the Fancy has returned to the sea. Every footprint left upon the wooden deck has vanished. The voices of the crew have been carried away by the wind. Even the great ship itself has disappeared from history. Somehow, the story remains. Perhaps that is the remarkable power of history. Ships rot. Empires rise and fall. Maps change. Borders move. But certain moments continue echoing across generations. Henry Every's attack on the Ganj-i-Sawai was one of those moments. It was not merely the seizure of treasure. It was an event that exposed how connected the world had already become during the late 17th century. A battle fought on the Indian Ocean affected merchants in London. Diplomats negotiated because of it. Governments changed policy because of it. Trading companies strengthened security because of it. The world's oceans suddenly seemed smaller than they had before. Looking back today, historians no longer see Henry Every simply as a pirate. They see him as part of a much larger story. A story about expanding global trade. About powerful empires competing across distant seas. About ordinary sailors struggling to survive in difficult conditions. About the fragile line between lawful warfare and outright piracy. About ambition, greed, opportunity, and consequence. It is easy to understand why later generations transformed him into legend. A mysterious ending invites imagination. No confirmed grave. No verified final confession. No certain account of his last days. Only scattered documents separated by oceans and centuries. History gives us enough pieces to recognize the man, but never quite enough to complete the picture. That uncertainty has inspired countless historians to continue searching. Old archives are still examined. Merchant records are still translated. Court papers are still compared. Letters written by governors, company officials, naval officers, and merchants continue revealing small details that earlier generations overlooked. Each discovery reminds us that history is never truly finished. Every generation asks new questions. Every generation notices different evidence. Perhaps one forgotten document still waits inside an overlooked collection somewhere in Britain. Perhaps another survives in India. Perhaps the final clue disappeared forever in a fire, a shipwreck, or simply the passing of time. The sea has never willingly surrendered all of its secrets. That is part of its nature. When we picture Henry Every today, it is worth setting aside the colorful myths for a moment. Forget the pirates. Forget the buried treasure maps. Forget the romantic adventures created by novels. Imagine an experienced sailor standing quietly on the deck of a wooden ship just before sunrise. The wind is steady. The sails pull gently overhead. Salt hangs in the cool morning air. Ahead stretches nothing except the open sea. Behind him lies a lifetime of difficult choices. Some made out of necessity. Some made out of ambition. Some that would change history forever. He could not possibly know that people more than 300 years later would still speak his name. He could not know that historians would debate his fate. He could not know that his greatest success would also become the reason the entire world searched for him. Like every person in history, he lived without knowing how history would remember him. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson hidden beneath this story. History is rarely shaped only by kings, queens, and famous generals. Sometimes an ordinary sailor changes the course of international politics. Sometimes one decision made aboard a single ship ripples across continents. Sometimes the greatest mysteries belong not to emperors, but to men whose final footsteps simply disappeared. The oceans have witnessed millions of voyages, countless storms, unnumbered shipwrecks, victories, defeats, explorations, discoveries, and tragedies. Among all those stories, Henry Every's remains one of the most extraordinary because it combines verified history with enduring mystery. The robbery was real. The diplomatic crisis was real. The worldwide manhunt was real. The disappearance remains unsolved. That is why his story continues to endure. Not because it promises hidden treasure, but because it reminds us that history is full of unanswered questions. And sometimes those unanswered questions teach us just as much as the answers themselves. So, as our voyage through the age of piracy gently comes to an end, imagine the sea becoming quieter once again. The cannons have fallen silent. The smoke has drifted away. The merchant ships continue their slow journeys across the horizon. The great pirate captains have become names preserved in old books and weathered archives. Only the endless rhythm of the waves remains. If you've enjoyed sailing through this chapter of history with me, I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Reading your comments is always one of the best parts of sharing these stories, and your suggestions often inspire future journeys into forgotten history. For now, let your thoughts drift as gently as the tide. Picture the calm ocean beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. Feel the cool evening breeze moving softly across the water. Allow the sounds of the old wooden ships to fade into the distance. Take one slow, deep breath, and then another. Let the worries of today drift away like a ship disappearing beyond the horizon. Close your eyes, relax your mind, and let the quiet echoes of history carry you peacefully into a restful night's sleep.